Hello, everyone. So once again, this is Tamal Mukherjee representing Literoma Publishing, and we're here to interview one of the winners of our coveted annual award, Nari Samman. So thank you so much, Tanushree Ghosh, for joining us from all the way from US. We are absolutely glad that you could beat the time zone and be here with us today. So without taking the storm away, I like to put the spotlight on the winner, Tanushree Ghosh. She is here with us. So why don't you start by introducing yourself?
Okay, sure. I hope everyone can hear me well. My name is Tanushree Ghosh. I go by Tanu Ghosh, as you can see on the background. I was born and brought up and raised in Kolkata. Then I did my master's from IIT Kanpur, then moved on to Cornell to do my PhD, which is when I came to US. My training background, all of that is in chemistry, material science. I worked in engineering. Right now I work for Intel. I'm a director there at the manufacturing and supply chain and operations. You see the Intel background behind me. That is because of a award I received last year for being the diversity and inclusion advocate of their Greater American region for the year. But Intel, of course, is not associated with this award or the other segments we'll talk about, or is not sponsoring any of this. It's just a background. My writing journey, I have always wanted to write, as that is my way for my activism, and also for as most writers, just sharing the stories and thoughts in their head. Started really with writing op-eds for the Huffington Post, and at around the same time published with Readomania. Since then, I have published quite a few anthologies, and I have also have two single author manuscripts published. The first one actually is From Another Land. This was, again, I mostly write, this is a narrative fiction, but at the same time, it is on social justice, human justice, focused on immigration, open borders, and so on. My first book was with Readomania, this is Defiant Dreams. This was on women's stories. Again, very, very human rights, social rights, gender justice. That is what I write most of my op-eds on also. And my most latest, which is most relevant for this award, is Beyond #MeToo, which is through Sage Publications. That is a complete non-fiction looking into Me Too, starting with Me Too, but then going back into the women's rights and everything else, problems with gender across the world, what really drives the injustices against women, solution space, all of that. It has been called a very comprehensive account. It celebrates many, many activism work that has been gone in India, from Vishakha to fights by women against, caste-based rapes and so on and so forth, against some of the acts from armed forces. So it has been very comprehensive in looking into the history, but also has a very forward-looking, research-based presentation of what gender rights means for India today. That's my writing journey. I already talked about my work and my background. Just to wrap it up, I'm mother to a daughter who turned 10 years old very soon. And then I also founded a nonprofit for social justice for women called Her Rights. And I am right now the board chair for that, but that's all that I do.
Awesome. So I'm really curious to know more about what I can see at the background, the inclusion advocate of the year. And of course, when you are talking about inclusion, that goes beyond gender. So it's primarily perhaps talking about LGBTQ++. And on the occasion of IWD, the International Women's Day, it will really not be fair not to talk about it when we have someone from that background. So why don't you tell us something about that?
Yeah, as you probably know, recently it's a good thing that the corporations have been quite diversity, equity, and inclusion focused. It has emerged from just diversity to then diversity and inclusion, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And all of that is very focused on making sure that there is representation. There is representation of all different kinds of people from everywhere around the world, which was always a goal as we went towards globalization. But more importantly, there is much more acceptance now towards gender being a spectrum of just people having different ways of expressing genders. And then woman is still a huge part of the human race still getting paid less, still primarily victims of violence in many places, and weapons made into weapons through oppression for any kind of geopolitical fight. So we have big issues there. This work really is focusing on all the things that I talked about already in my introduction. But what I also try to do, I volunteer for a lot of human rights and women's organizations. One of the key things I think for equality of women is their empowerment. Economic empowerment actually is social empowerment. So I try to do a lot of things to, just help women advance in their careers, finding them jobs, making sure there is training, so on and so forth. And another arm of that is when women have found employment, how do you make sure they actually thrive and they advance? In the current climate, it can be very difficult because in many of the boards, the executives are primarily male. In many of the rooms you walk into, these are very male-dominated profession. Obviously, women have to balance other things like caregiving, social conditioning, expectations, motherhood, parenthood, I would rather say, still primarily very gender defined. All of that makes it harder for women to progress. I'm not saying it's not difficult for men, but it is, in my opinion, much more challenging for women. So the second part of the work is then, okay, you have found people employment, you have gotten them into a space where they should now thrive. Otherwise, they will get out of the workforce and you will never close the gender gap. So that's the second part of the work of trying to make sure that you have inclusion in the workplace so that everyone can have equal opportunity of growth and an equal probability of success in workplace.
Awesome. Thanks for highlighting that. And now, since you already talked about the 3 books that you had written, I'd like to request you to read a segment from one of your books. I can understand it can be very difficult to pick and choose any particular segment because all are your creations. But still, if I may request you to pick one segment and read it for our audience.
Okay, so I will read from Beyond Me Too. I will
Sure.
give a very brief context of why I'm choosing this.
Right.
Women's rights and why women should have rights. First of all, that is a very, very weird question for me. It's not just women, it's transgender, LGBTQ. I don't understand why they shouldn't have rights. And this becomes very, very difficult to explain to my daughter when she was younger, when she would ask questions like ऐसे कैसे हो सकता है, or how can it be like, कि boy or girls different क्यों है, all of that. Often that is looked at as a social problem. It is not that it's not a social problem, but it's also an economic problem. And the problem is if you keep a certain part of your workforce enclosed away from workplaces, not earning money, falling off, your GDP growth is much slower. So in Beyond Me Too, I obviously, as I said, I talked about a lot of the activism work around the world. In India, brought it into context. I talked a lot about soft patriarchy, did a lot of analysis through interviews, academic work, and even just narrative from everyday people on why the gender problems exist. But I also put in a chapter on the economic aspect of this. And I will read from there. The cost of gender inequality globally, 141 countries were included in the analysis, due to loss of human capital wealth is estimated at 160.2 trillion. If we simply assume that women should earn as much as men, twice the value of GDP globally. Said differently, human capital wealth could increase by 21.7% globally and total wealth by 14% with gender equality in earnings. Globally today, women account for only 38% of human capital wealth versus 62% for men. In low and lower middle income countries, women account for a third or less of human capital. 55% of women aged 15 to 64 are engaged in the labor market compared to 78% of men. However, according to McKinsey study, the Asia Pacific region could add 4 trillion to its collected GDP annually just by achieving gender parity. India's economy has the second largest chunk in this growth potential out of the entire APAC region. Loss of women from the workforce in India is largely attributed to women's safety or lack thereof. Therefore, the cost of gender violence and discrimination are heavily interrelated for India, and the cost and the price is economic, not just social. Now, I will not read any more segments from here, but there are many aspects of this, right? Why should we look at every human being as equal, and why should it be better for everyone if some systemic social problems are eliminated? It is a question that should be really simple, but in a way it's not. This book talks a lot about it. It has a lot of narratives, a lot of information, and it really, again, brings it back to the whole question of Me Too and the fiasco around it, on why such a social movement, like, it came, it was a storm, it was globally taken around, and then is it dying down? And if it's dying down, should we let it die down, or should we learn something for it? Should we try to do something for gender equality? So thank you for letting me read from that.
So I think the bigger thanks should be given to you for bringing out such a data-driven perspective. So I had heard a lot of people talking a lot of points about it, but what you had done in your book seems to be talking about some very relevant data points. So thank you so much for bringing those aspects out. And I'm sure that our audience also will love to have a look at the book and have a deeper understanding and better understanding of the topic. So on the final note, as a final message, I'd like to request you if you can give some message to our audience or whoever will be listening to or hearing this particular recording.
Yeah, my message is really twofold. First is look at soft patriarchy as much as you can. Be aware of it around you, whether you are a man, woman, wherever you fall in the gender spectrum. Look at things that are discrimination that doesn't seem like discrimination. Because when big things happens like gang rape, mass violence, acid attacks and stuff, there's a lot of outrage. And I've talked about this in my book. But those big things don't suddenly happen. They happen because of things we do every day, how we behave, how we treat women. There are things, I have friends and families I've seen where they will warm, a glass of milk will be given to the son first and then to the daughter later. These things are becoming lesser and lesser, but you might have certain things that you say, hey, in terms of whether it's a daughter's education or in terms of what kind of messaging you give. I see so much in the media now about dowry and fighting on this, NRI wives left behind after giving dowry and marrying off. Think about these things. Why would you give dowry? If you are a woman, think about this thing. Why would you let your family put in any kind of money? If you are a parent and you're thinking, if I have to marry off my daughter, and I want to give a bed, almirah, anything, think of it. What that gift means, not just for your daughter, but for the broader society. If you're a woman who are changing your surname after marriage, think about it. Think about what that means about carrying family's name and female infanticide, what that propagates in the society. So just try to connect your small everyday actions to the bigger things that lead to. So that would be my message.
Absolutely. That's a great message. I think very practical. Thanks for bringing out the concept of soft patriarchy as well, because as you quite rightly mentioned, whenever we talk about patriarchy, we get into the macro things without giving the due importance to the micro transactional levels that happen on a daily basis. Thank you for bringing that out. And I'm sure everyone of the Literoma family will be as curious as me to know more about the books that you had written and grab a copy of it and read. Congratulations once again on winning this coveted award of Nari Samman this year from Literoma. The entire Literoma family is indebted for bringing out all these concepts also right from the United States of America. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you for the honor, and thank you for taking the time to listen to me just blabber about these things.